Welcome to the Lair. Tonight I'm talking with Derek White, one of the minds behind DarkSpace, a science fiction rules hack for Shadowdark. Together with his co-creator Than Gibson, they created and released the basic rules through DMing the world and DriveThru RPG. Now they've got a Kickstarter for an expanded version that blew past their $15,000 goal and just crossed the $70,000 threshold, which is pretty darn amazing. So, what's the pitch for DarkSpace?
Rules light, play sci-fi your way. That's my pitch. Because DarkSpace is all about playing the sci-fi you want. That's one of the things we came into it wanting to do, is to make... There are so many subgenres of science fiction. There's space western. There is heavy-duty science style like Star Trek. And so we wanted you to be able to play the science fiction you wanted to play. So we tried to make it where there's no specific genre. You want to play space fantasy, you want orcs in space, you want something like Spelljammer, you can use DarkSpace for that, or you can use it for something like Star Trek or Star Wars, whatever type of science fiction you want. And Rules Light is something that appealed to me just simply because that harkens back to my early days of gaming in the 80s when I was playing out of the Moldvay basic D&D set.
Right.
I wanted something simple and easy and quick to play because I don't have the time I used to have when I was 13 years old.
This is very true. I don't either. Although now my kids are off to, one's out of college, one's off to college. And so I'm starting to get a little bit of time back, but still it's nowhere near what it would have been when you were in middle school. Was there a particular thing that inspired you to come up with DarkSpace? Like, you guys wanted to run a sci-fi campaign, everybody was complaining about other rule sets. Was there a particular bolt of inspiration that led to DarkSpace?
What hit me when I started working on this was I had seen so much of a glut of fantasy over the past 20 years. And science fiction was my first love. I started reading science fiction in the 70s. Just checking books out of the library, picking up books. I grew up in a time when the RIF program, reading as fundamental, was big in school. And so I was getting all kinds of science fiction. That's what I started reading before I read fantasy. And that was kind of my first love. And I thought, you know what? But I got into fantasy really right before I started playing Dungeons & Dragons, because at that time we were having a resurgence of fantasy and culture. Movies were coming out. Conan the Barbarian was coming out. Beastmaster was coming out. And so I was like, ooh, this is great too. This is fun. And then this game called Dungeons & Dragons fell into my hands. And I was like, wow, I could even play a game where I'm one of the fantasy characters. And for a time there, that's all there seemed to be. But with the release of the Lord of the Rings movies and all of that, we kept seeing more and more fantasy. And because of the other work I do, I just kind of got a little burnt out on fantasy. I was like, let me get back to my first love, science fiction. I mean, I love the Alien movies. I love Star Wars. I love The Black Hole by Disney.
Oh, yes. Yes.
All of those things you want to run a sci-fi game. And I couldn't find any really quick, easy rules out there. There were lots of rules that I liked, but most of my gaming group that I had were in their 20s and 30s. And so they were familiar with Dungeons & Dragons, specifically 5th edition. And I was like, you know what? One of the problems is that all the sci-fi rules that are out there, at that time, there weren't any really based off of 5th edition. There was Starfinder, but it was even more complex than 5e.
Oh, yes.
And I said, I want something quick and light. So I picked up a copy of a game called Teens in Space, which uses the Kids on Bike engine. And I liked it, but there wasn't as much risk involved. And the type of games I ran, I wanted there to be risk. I wanted to be risks of character death. I wanted space to feel scary. Right. Those of us who grew up in the 70s and 80s, we remember space being scary. I mean, I remember in high school watching the space shuttle freaking blow up. Space was scary. Space was terrifying, but not terrifying necessarily in the cosmic horror sense, though you can use our rules for that. It was terrifying in the sense of going into space is dangerous. And Teens in Space didn't really give you that feel, because the whole idea is, in a game like that, is character death has to serve a narrative purpose. And my narrative purpose would be, hey, guess what? Outer space is deadly. That's my narrative purpose. I would tell that I wanted that risk to be there. And it's okay. I love running the Teens in Space game. My gaming group absolutely loved it. But I said, I want something a little more. And so my friend Than, my co-creator, he talked to me. He had introduced me to Shadowdark, which was really nice, quick, rules-like fantasy. And we began talking, and he's like, you know what? We could do these sci-fi rules based off of Shadowdark. And so that was kind of my inspiration there, was I wanted to get back into science fiction, and I wanted our gaming groups to tell more science fiction stories.
Yeah, I'm right there with you on the old school sci-fi. I too kind of grew up on Asimov and Clarke and just reading every freaking book I could get my hands on. And I kind of fell into fantasy through movies. I mean, I read The Lord of the Rings and I read a couple of fantasy books, but when I got to be an adult, I realized just how huge the holes were in my understanding of the fantasy literature landscape relative to sci-fi, where I read just about everything I could get my hands on. And I remember having Star Frontiers and wanting to play Star Frontiers and then never actually getting to play Star Frontiers. I built out whole campaigns for it, but I never actually truly played it with other human beings. So I totally get the itch to want to play some sci-fi. Talking rules light, it's interesting as I was reading through it, there's some of the choices you've made, and I'm curious like how that's also played out at your table. So like the Quick Start Edition doesn't have ancestries like Elf and Dwarf, although you can just use those from base Shadowdark. But instead you have species, but then you don't have like the pre-built out species, like the insectoid alien, this is the ape-like alien, this is the plant alien. Instead you have just a traits table that you could basically just pick your trait. Why did you go that way instead of more traditional, I might say? And how's it worked out?
One, it's worked out great. And the reason it's worked out well is because our idea behind it was we wanted you to create the race or the species you wanted to create for your particular sci-fi. So like if we gave you the insectoid, that puts you in a certain type of sci-fi setting. What ended up happening is it allowed, if you wanted to make your own science fiction setting, you got to describe the creatures that were in it. So if you get an amphibian, you can create your own amphibious race. It also keeps you from having to worry about copywritten properties as well. You don't have to worry about that. So you take the trait and then you make what you want to. For example, one of the traits we have is extra arms. So now you have this, a cartoon my daughter used to love when she was growing up was Ben 10. So now you can design this 4-armed alien based off of that cartoon you watched when you were a kid, and then you get to name it. And one of the things I like about that personally with my DMing style is it allowed me to collaborate with my players. So I sit down in a session 0. I'm like, which traits do you like? And they tell me, and I say, okay, let's design that alien species for this setting. And they'll give me they'll give me a general idea, and then I get my players' input. I take notes about it, and boy, now my players are more invested in the game because now they've contributed to the setting. So that's one of the reasons I like putting that in there. It allows you, again, to play sci-fi your way instead of feeling like you're pigeonholed by the rules.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's interesting because I've seen it both ways with my players over the years, where sometimes they just like, you're not the boss of me, and like they just want to immediately, if there's any constraints, they want to break them all and just build their own character class or their own species. And then other people are like, but I need rules. I need that comfortable space where you've told me what the species are. So I can see that easily working both ways, because as a DM you can just come up with, hey, these are my stock characters, stock classes, or whatever, if you want to take it, and otherwise like collaborate. It's an interestingly wide open space, and I think David and I have talked about this on the podcast a bunch with Shadowdark. The biggest challenge I've had coming from D&D 5th edition, which I still run and I still play, is it's got so many rules, right? Yeah. And it's stripped down from what it was before. I mean, they built it back up a little bit with the 2024 edition, but a lot of times in Shadowdark we'll go, oh, well, what's the rule for this? And it's like, there isn't one. And to your point, 30 years ago, there wasn't one either, right? So Maybe longer than
I
that.
wish it was
point,
just 30 years ago.
I was
Kid,
40 years ago.
it was 40 years ago for me. 42 years ago for me. Yeah.
That sounds about
Which
right.
is appropriate, 42, the answer to the life universe
Of
and everything.
course.
Yeah.
Of course. Yeah, so it's I have to update my chronometer in my brain because it is much closer to 40 years than it is to 30. But in any case, basic edition D&D, right? Like it was pretty basic. You just kind of made things up as you went along in terms of skills and like, can I do this or not do this?
Right. And that's the nice thing I love about Shadowdark. We do the same in DarkSpace. You want to do something, you just try it. But now what we have, whereas back in the day, you had to roll under your stat for it to work. You had to roll low. So if I told you, give me a dexterity check back in 1982, 1983, and your dexterity was a 10, you had to roll under it and get a 9. And hopefully you had some negative modifiers for that. Well, now, of course, everything's roll high, which is really great. But now there are more guidelines. For example, you set a difficulty class of 9, 13, 15, or 18. And so that is much more, there's a little bit more of a structure than there was when I was 13, which is very helpful for me. And so the nice part is if somebody says, hey, can I swing from that chandelier? Well, let's use a sci-fi element. Well, like I had a guy wanting to just try and open the bay doors of a one-shot I was running a little while back. He's like, I want to open the doors with a crowbar. And I'm like, what? He's like, well, I'm strong. I was like, okay, I'll give you advantage on the roll, but I will tell you now the DC is going to be 25. It should be 30 maybe.
Right.
But you can try it, which is my favorite DM expression or GM expression. Sure, you could try that.
Yeah. The other thing that I found people struggled with on the Shadowdark side is there's a lot of stuff where, and I think Mothership has the same thing, and I think it's been an aesthetic that's kind of come along in a number of games these days, which is if you can do it, you just do it, right?
Oh,
and if it's not hard, right? If you're trying to force open an airlock with a crowbar, there might be some safety mechanisms you have to override. Yeah. But if you can do it, you just do it, and so that speeds things along because you're not making all of these checks.
Yeah. In the same game, I had someone come up to this malfunctioning bot. It was a loader bot. And they came up to it and they said, what's wrong with it? I had them roll a check for it. I said, well, you can tell that the energy cell's not really working right in this bot. They said, well, I just want to remove it. I said, go ahead. They're like, what? What? I was like, yeah, dude, you rolled to see what was wrong with it. You're a spacer. You know how to remove an energy cell. Right. And I love that. One of the other things I love about Shadowdark in particular, and I had been doing something like this in my games, is I always hated searching for traps and never finding them, especially in the old days when it was really hard to find a trap. Now, you just roll to disarm it. If you're a rogue or a thief in Shadowdark, you do not roll to find a trap. If you say I'm looking for traps, you automatically find it and you roll to disarm it. If you're not a thief, you have to roll to find the trap. And if you try and disarm it, you roll with disadvantage. So much smoother, so much simpler, and makes the pace of the game go by so much quicker.
Yeah, so similar to Species, there's no classes in the game, in the expansion, in the hack.
Yeah, either one.
DarkSpace. Yeah. So instead there's archetypes. So you've got strong and quick and wise. And so I think I know the answer to this based on what we've been talking about, but like, why did you go the archetype route and why these archetypes?
Well, there's a story behind that. When I was working on the rules by myself, well, I was actually working on them with another guy. Than and I had talked about it. Than's work got really busy. He and I had been working on it some, and so I was talking to someone else. I was trying to work with them because, honestly, I wasn't looking to publish rules. I was just looking for something that I could use for my own games, which is what we all do, right?
Right.
And so me and this other guy, we were trying to convert character classes from Shadowdark into this game, which didn't even have a name yet. And so we were trying to convert that. And, I was having trouble communicating with that person, so I was just like, I sat down and I just started converting them over. And I realized this isn't working because you really don't have character classes in a multi-genre science fiction game. Okay, if you have a character class of a captain of the ship, you're stuck in what kind of game you're going to run.
Right.
And so I was telling Than about all this, and Than said, I got an idea. I'll get back to you. And he's like, hey, here are the archetypes, which, if you remember D20 Modern,
I do.
That's exactly where he got the idea from, was D20 Modern, take archetypes. And Than, this was the genius that I think Than brings to the game, is that he's like, you know what? Character classes, which we agreed on, character classes do not work in sci-fi. And I was actually talking to Kelsey about it, and she was very encouraging. Kelsey, the creator of Shadowdark. And she was very encouraging, but I could tell the character classes just didn't feel right. And so Than got in, he put in those archetypes. I'm like, that's what works. And it was like the Rosetta Stone, or the Rosetta Key, if you will, to opening up how you could play the type of sci-fi you want to play.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. They still end up having some of the characteristics that people are familiar with, right? So you get like what your weapon proficiencies are, armor proficiencies, effectively, your hit points, your talents and what have you. But I like the fact that it's more abstract than being the very specific role. Because you're right. I've been playing a lot of Mothership recently. You have that scientist role. Well, you're going to be a scientist.
Right.
Right? There's some flexibility in there. But it's a different kind of game, and it's going very much at a very specific genre. Whereas I like how this plays very well to that open-ended, what kind of sci-fi do you want to play? So if I wanted to port Star Frontiers to this, it'd be pretty easy. If I wanted to knock off Thundar the Barbarian, probably not that hard.
Funny you say that. I'm using DarkSpace rules to currently run, for my gaming group, a post-apocalyptic Thundar the Barbarian type setting.
Nice.
And so it is very easy to do that, because all I did was I took DarkSpace, combined it with Shadowdark, so you could get your creatures, threw in some mutants, threw in some other things. So now you've got mutant lizard men running around who have evolved over the last 300 years. And then a portal to another world opened up, and you've got elves and dwarves and all kinds of other things. Then I threw in some Shadowrun, where, you know what, after this comet went through the world, elves were being born into the world again. Dwarves were being born into the world. Some mom woke up one morning and gave birth to a kobold baby, which freaked my players out. They're like, what? Ew. I was like, no, I'm using old school kobolds, and they're cute. They look like this.
Nice,
these John Kovalik kobolds. That's what I did. And they're like, oh, okay. Okay. Yes. Mom had puppies.
The Triad powers are the game's psionic abilities, and so they're broken up into body, mind, and soul. And you have example powers like enhanced strength, calming emotions, life sense. And what I found interesting was, like, it's the high level summary. This is how this works. And the next page is basically, and so this is the applied version, but you don't break it down into individual powers. Like, there's no inventory of available powers for Triad characters. So I'm guessing, again, that kind of aesthetic is carrying forward. Is that something you're going to refine in the expansion?
Yes. Than is working on that. He has a lot of it worked out. I haven't reviewed that part. The Triad is Than's baby, because he's really gotten into that. And he is an old Star Wars guy, man. Star Wars is his jam, whereas I love Star Wars, don't get me wrong. And I saw the first one in the theaters in the 70s. But my sci-fi jam was Doom, Nice. I mean, this is a guy read the expanded universe, all of that Star Wars stuff. And so he's really been working on it. And he wants it to work in a way like the Force works. Whereas the player tells the GM what they want to do, and depending on the difficulty, the DC goes up and the damage goes up, or the healing goes up.
Very cool. So let's talk Kickstarter, because you had the
Yeah.
basic rules. We were talking about a lot of those things. What do folks get in the Kickstarter? Like, how does it get bigger? Because I see
Well,
it's 200 pages just for the core book, so it's like
yeah,
about more than double what the original book was, right?
right. Now, one of the things that we did not have in our original core book, because our original core book was we just wanted to get something out there to get people started. We wanted something for us to use. But one of the things the original core book does not have in it is a game master section. And so I had already been working on a project for my other work about how to run games. For those who don't know, I use games to help build community. I do that a lot with churches because I'm a clergy person. I'm a United Methodist clergy person and do a lot of gaming chaplaincy work. So I teach people how to use games to build community and build gaming groups. But in that space, there are a lot of people who don't know anything about it. And so I'd been working on this book for a couple of years, which was going nowhere because I couldn't get past 30 pages, you know? It's like, because as someone who's a Southern preacher and was taught very early on that the brain can only contain what the butt will allow, I realized I started getting my sermons shorter. And so I learned how to condense things. And so I couldn't expand past those 30 pages or so. And I had people giving me advice. Dan and I began to talk, and he's like, I want you to talk about how to run sci-fi. Because a lot of people don't know how to run sci-fi. And we want to talk about how to run different genres of sci-fi. So I took my notes from that, expanded on that. So we increased the game master section. We also want to give people what they really love, monsters. So we've got more monsters in there. We opened up the level early on. We're going to put in cyber hacking rules. So now we're going to have pages with cyber hacking rules. We've got chase rules, which are going to work really well with the Shadowdark system, because Shadowdark doesn't use range like a lot of 5th edition games. It just has close, near, and far. And
Right.
so Than has put together a really cool, effective, quick way to do a chase scene that will work for your players, but it also works for your spaceships. We're also
Very cool.
we're going to expand on how to design a spaceship. We're going to have more spaceship classifications. So that's going to go in. We're tweaking some of the archetypes to expand on them. One of the things we have right now in the original core rules is we have a multifunction android. We're going to now change that to a machine-based archetype, so that if you want to be that guy who's walking around in power armor, you can now be a machine-based archetype. So there's lots of areas we could expand on, and that's what we've done. But the thing, of course, I'm the most proud of is the GM section.
That's really cool. I have experienced this myself when I was running a Star Wars game a number of years ago. What do you find to be the hardest part of running sci-fi, or the hardest part for people to get their heads around?
The hardest part of running sci-fi for me, with my players currently, was as I talked about earlier, was conveying to them how deadly it could be.
Okay.
That was a difficult part, because if you're used to 5th edition of Dungeons and Dragons, you're used to characters that are going to live through a lot of stuff. So that was a difficult part. But the other part is the type of stories you're telling. Fantasy tells a story that speaks to a mythical past that never really existed. So fantasy tends to look to an idealized past where you did all these great heroic things. Science fiction stories, and I talk about this in the book, but science fiction stories deal with the present world in which we live, but it uses science fiction to talk about it. So, for example, in Star Trek, many people, trying not to sound too political here, but Star Trek was a very political TV show. And so Star Trek dealt with issues of racism, but they used science fiction to kind of remove it. And they did that on purpose. I recently was watching a video, and I didn't realize that's what Rod Serling was doing. Rod Serling was very political in the Twilight Zone, but the way he got past the censors on TV, they did not want you to do that sort of thing. But the way he got past the censors was say, oh, it's just a science fiction story. And so one of the things I tell people is doing that. I was like, if you want your game, they don't have to. They don't have to. My games do. But if you want your game to talk about real world issues, turn it into a sci-fi game, because sci-fi games handle real world issues a lot better.
Yeah, it gives you that level of abstraction. I think for me, with Star Wars in particular, it was just the kind of the puzzles at the table sort of thing. In D&D, I think it's very much easy to fall into, you're just fighting the monsters, and everybody is like helping people fight the monsters. But in Star Wars, and I think in a lot of sci-fi, it's not just Star Wars, like it takes a team. And, you know, you've got the slicer, you've got the hacker, you've got the big bad soldier guy who with the heavy gun, but then you've got the person who's hacking the door to get it open. Yeah. And so that mix of like pivoting away from just it's a dungeon crawl into, you know, well, geez, I got to figure out something for the crafty guy to do, or the weird guy to do, or what have you. It's an interesting genre to run for. So stretch goals, at 70,000, I suspect you may have a few.
Our first stretch goal, of course, was the hacking rules. But then what we did is we got some creators we know and love, many of whom are friends of ours. We met through gaming conventions, through some of my work, through some of Than's work, through both of our connections. So what we did is we took some creators from Morkborg, is a very rules-like system as well, similar in some ways to Shadowdark. And so we had the Borg invasion, and we got some more Borg creators to come in and design legendary denizens for us. And they did that. They designed those. We blew through those stretch goals. I'm trying to think of what the next one. The Call Goes Out, where we have a number of gaming YouTubers in this space who are really popular. So we reached out to them. We asked them to design some legendary characters, which we wanted them because, one, they're very popular. A lot of people now in their free time are listening to podcasts like yours, or they're listening to YouTube podcasts like those. And so they listen to them. And so we're like, hey, we want you guys to create something. And so the signal went out. We got those in. We burnt through those stretch goals. And now we've opened up our newest stretch goal. We opened that up today. And this is where we pulled in some legendary creators, and they're creating legendary denizens for us for our monster book, where we're going to have full page artwork for each one that they're creating. And some of the artwork is just amazing. And this is all paid artwork. We're hiring artists. That's part of what people are paying for, is helping us pay for the art. One of your biggest expenses in something like this is paying for art, right, next to your printing and shipping costs. But so today we opened up Ed Stark. And for those who don't know Ed Stark wrote for West End Games on a little game called Star Wars, you may have heard of. Ed also worked on Paranoia. So Ed has a really good sci-fi background. He's got this great monster. The update went out today, which is almost like a Russian doll monster, which is just totally cool. And our next goal that we're headed toward is, of course, the goal I really want. It's a great friend of mine. I've known him for years, and some of your listeners may have heard of him. His name's Mark Miller, the creator of Traveler. Mark and I have known each other on the gaming convention scene. Mark has been a tremendous friend over the years, a big encourager in my work as a chaplain in the gaming community. And so he has created a great denizen and a perfect NPC for the game. And I hope we can break that $80,000 mark to get this denizen from Mark. And last, but of course not least, we reached out to Kelsey Dion, the creator of Shadowdark, which is our last stretch goal at 90,000.
Wow. Very, very cool. So I did have a question for you about going back to kind of how it's played, or maybe it's how you played. And I don't think there's one definitive answer to this, but I think one of the things that I've loved in my game is the impact of light in Shadowdark. So the fact that light is a resource. I run Shadowdark as part of my lunchtime game. So 1 hour a week, my friends and I get together and we play online. It's pretty nice. And the torches are an hour. The game's an hour. Just works out beautifully because everybody stays focused. How does light play into this game?
Well, light plays in our game. You can use light. But what we've done one of the things we've done, we began to think about this more. In our initial core rules, light played the same role as it did in Shadowdark. Basically, the idea that your energy cell in your glow rod only had an hour of power. Now, one of the things I did in my games was I just abstracted that out. People were like, well, you know, a light source is going to last for more than an hour. I said, that's true. But the idea of all these things you're doing, they last more than an hour. You know, the hour real-time timer is just keep the action going. But that hour, when you place it into the game, is more abstract. And so that's what we use. So your energy cells would, for your light source would run out within an hour. But then we started talking about it. I was telling Kelsey about it, and we were talking. And Kelsey said, well, you know what? The great thing about science fiction is that you can use a torch timer for so many different things. And so what I started doing in my games is your rebreather. Your rebreather only gives you an hour of oxygen. So I started using oxygen for that. So now, you know, in a game I just ran an actual play with some friends recently, they had an hour to get the air turned on, or they were going to have to switch out their energy cells in their rebreathers. So that had a really big tension building moment, which was really great. One of the things that Than has done, which I really like too, is you can use disaster moments. You're on a space station. It just got hit with a meteor. This space station is going to blow up in, start the timer, 1 hour.
Exactly.
So one of the things we're experimenting with, and we're going to talk about in the rules, is using different, we don't want you to just be tied to one type of timer. We want you to be able to use different timers to increase the tension of the game, as well as, for me, what's important is to give you that 1 hour, give you that stopping point after an hour, because that's usually when it's a good time. Even if you're running a 3-hour game, it's a good time for a break. It really helps me. I run a lot of games. You know the work I've done for years. I run a lot of games at conventions. Oh my goodness, when the players love that, because now they're like, we don't have people peeling off going, I gotta go to the bathroom, I gotta go do this. As soon as I start that timer, they know in an hour they're gonna get a break.
Yeah, I did something similar for my mothership game I ran over at my last con. They wake up on a ship, it's in bad shape. The ship is having various events that are going to be happening as it continues to get worse, and they're trying to figure out what's happening. And so over the course of that hour or so, like, an event happens, or 20 minutes, or whatever, the timer gets set. And then it does focus that, like, well, what's that timer for? Well, I guess you guys should find that out.
Exactly. That's beautiful. I love that.
Running a Kickstarter always seems to be a roller coaster. What surprised you the most?
I would say what surprised me is, like, when you get really close to that goal, and then suddenly people change their pledge, and it goes back down. I was like, okay, I'd never paid attention to that when watching other Kickstarters. My first Kickstarter that we did was when we released our zine back in February, and we hit our goal really quick because it was a small goal. It's just a zine. It was just $200. And so after we hit the goal, I'm like, ooh, we hit the $200 goal. Woohoo. And we just were like, okay, at least I was like, okay, let's move on. And so I didn't think about it. But with this one and it blowing up so quickly, that was my first big surprise. In under 3 hours, we hit our goal. I was like, what in the world's going on here? You know, I was hoping to hit our goal within the first day, but under 3 hours, we hit our goal. And then it kept going. And I was like, we're at 20,000. We're at 30,000. I was like, what in the world is happening? That, of course, surprised me, not knowing how well it would take off. But then as we're trying to get toward these bigger goals, it's like, oh, wow, we're like today, we were just sitting at like a $68,000 mark. And then we got up to 69, and then it dropped back down to 68. And then we got up to 69.5, and it dropped back down. Then we hit 70,000. The announcement goes out, and then we drop immediately under 70,000. And we're like, what is going on here? So that's crazy. But it's also understandable because we're releasing this. You know, we started before the holiday season. But we also know that people are on tight budgets. The economy is crazy here, and we also know that people are wondering about their budgets for Christmas. You could say, "All right, I backed this Kickstarter for you, but you don't get your Christmas gift until May of next year or April of next year or whenever it ships out."
I know I've done it. I've had some Kickstarters where I back them, and then you do your monthly budget and go, "Oh, yeah, right. Okay, so maybe I should drop a tier or two. Maybe I need to go with the PDF only version." In this case, it's got a number of really cool books. There's like the core book, then there's some supplements and what have you. So everyone should definitely check out the Kickstarter to see the full range of things. Is there anything in particular you want to add?
Well, we do have a lot of great add-ons. I'm so thankful. The people at Black Oak Workshop are really good friends of mine. I've known them for years. I knew Craig Zipsky before he even started Black Oak. I've known Craig for probably close to 25 years. So we reached out to Craig, and we've got special Black Oak dice that are a great add-on. I was really happy to be able to do that. But one of the things I'm really excited about is we have a premium book, which we still amazingly have like 20 copies left on the early bird special, where you can get a premium edition with a glow-in-the-dark cover, which is really cool. That has me excited that we get a glow-in-the-dark cover for DarkSpace. So those are some really cool things. We didn't realize at least I didn't realize how big a community we already had until a few months ago. And we started having people ask for merchandise. So Than put up merchandise on our DMing the World, and he's like, "Hey, why not just add some merchandise to our Kickstarter?" And so now we've even got DarkSpace hats, DarkSpace dice tags, all kinds of cool things on there.
Very cool. I have a non sequitur in terms of glow in the dark book. So I got Cyborg. It's the sci-fi version of Morkborg. I run Cyberpunk Red, and so I found it to be a great source book. It's got like lots of great little charts and things hidden away inside of it. So I was reading it. And then one night I rolled over in the middle of the night. I saw this thing glowing on my nightstand. I'm like, "What the heck is that?" And then I realized, oh wait, Cyborg glows in the dark. Okay, I didn't know that Cyborg glows in the dark. I think if people buy the deluxe edition, they will know that it glows in the dark. But I was surprised.
Yeah, it's great. We just love the idea of that. And I was going to check out Cyborg, but I didn't get a chance to get in on that Kickstarter because I want to support all the science fiction that's in this space, man. I want people to play more science fiction.
Definitely. It's always been one of the things that I really enjoy. So I 100% support that. So everybody, thanks for joining us for this Interstellar episode. Like and subscribe to the show on YouTube or visit us at lairofsecrets.com. And Derek, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.